I want you to imagine a friend of yours. We all have someone like this in our wider circle, or, at least we know their archetype.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The one who just seems to have it all figured out on paper.
Right. From the outside, this friend looks incredibly successful. Let's say you drive by their house and they've just put on this massive new addition.
Uh-huh.
There's a brand new, luxury SUV sitting in the driveway. They're wearing designer clothes, eating at the best restaurants in town.
And their social media is just, a highlight reel of sheer prosperity.
Exactly. But then one day, you get a glimpse behind the curtain. You find out their secret.
They aren't actually making more money at their job, are they?
No. Instead, they are maxing out 3 different high-yield credit cards every single month. They're taking out a second mortgage, quietly selling off priceless family heirlooms just to keep up the minimum payments.
Wow. So on paper, their spending is through the roof.
Yeah, their lifestyle looks like an economic miracle. But their actual net worth, their sustainable long-term wealth, it is bleeding out.
Right. And the psychological and financial stress of maintaining that facade is, literally making them sick.
So here's the question for you to ponder today. Can an entire country do this?
That is a phenomenal question.
Can a whole nation look like an economic miracle on the surface while quietly mortgaging its own future and its own environment in the background?
And the data suggests that, well, yes, a nation can absolutely run this playbook, though, usually not intentionally.
Right. It's not like they sit down and plan to do it.
No, it happens through a highly complex web of macroeconomic incentives, demographic shifts, and historical circumstances. We see this quite often in transitional economies where the influx of capital kind of masks underlying structural decay.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a comprehensive 15-page document titled The Multidimensional Perspective Report on Kosovo's National Development.
It's a really fascinating read.
It really is. Our mission today is to look way beyond the shiny headline numbers that usually get thrown around when we talk about emerging economies.
We really need to peel back the layers of the economic data to uncover the hidden costs of rapid economic growth.
Exactly. And just to set the stage for you, the sources we're diving into focus on Kosovo. It's an emerging economy right at a transitional crossroads in southeastern Europe.
Yeah, with a population of about 1.76 million people as of the 2023 data.
Okay, let's unpack this. What kind of data are we actually looking at here?
So the data set we're working with is highly robust. We are synthesizing over 1,000 different indicators today.
1,000. That's massive.
Yeah, it's largely drawn from international institutional metrics like the World Bank, spanning all the way from 1960 to 2024.
Okay.
We are covering macroeconomic policy, national debt, governance efficacy, social welfare, and crucially, environmental impact.
Right. And the overarching goal is to separate this mirage of growth from actual sustainable prosperity.
Precisely. We need to see what's really going on beneath the surface.
So the visual design of the very first page of this report sets up the entire mystery perfectly. The cover is just this stark, minimalist white background.
It's very striking.
Yeah. And right in the center, there is an enormous, bold, upward-pointing arrow. And it's labeled GDP Continuous Growth.
Which looks great, right?
It looks amazing. But right underneath that arrow, casting a heavy shadow, is this dark area circled in bright red.
The hidden cost.
Exactly. And that red circle is labeled Adjusted Net Savings and Environmental Depletion. So you have this immediate visual tension.
The arrow is pointing to the sky, but there is a heavy red-circled anchor dragging right beneath it.
Right. So let's start with that massive upward arrow, because the raw economic output numbers here are, well, they are not small.
Far from it. If you trace back to the year 2000, Kosovo's gross domestic product in current U.S. dollars was hovering around $5.1 billion.
Okay, $5.1 billion.
But you fast forward to 2023, and that number has surged to nearly $10.4 billion.
Wait, really? So they have more than doubled their overall economic size in just over 2 decades?
Yes. And if we look at gross national income, or GNI, it's even more impressive.
GNI measured at purchasing power parity, right, to account for the actual cost of living.
Exactly. It hit $24 billion in 2023. The report even uses a green arrow to highlight the post-2020 period.
Showing incredibly strong purchasing power and, a very resilient rebound from the global pandemic.
Yes, the recovery was quite strong.
Doubling your economy in that time frame is a massive injection of wealth. The money is clearly flowing, transactions are happening.
And the standard of living, at least in a purely consumer sense, has definitely elevated.
The arrow is undeniably pointing up. But this is where I want to push back a bit or, at least look at that red circled shadow.
Go for it.
Because if I double my salary at work, but the stress of the new job causes me to develop chronic health issue, and my medical bills completely wipe out that extra cash I'm bringing home, am I actually wealthier?
That is the perfect analogy.
Right. My bank account has more money flowing through it, sure, but my overall well-being and my future stability are worse off.
You are hitting on the fundamental flaw of relying solely on traditional GDP to measure national success.
It's a flawed metric on its own.
Completely. Traditional GDP is essentially a speedometer. It tells you how fast the economic engine is running right now.
Because it just measures the total value of all goods and services produced over a specific time period, right?
Exactly. But GDP has a massive, glaring blind spot. It only measures what you produce. It does not measure what you destroy in the process of that production.
So if I cut down an ancient old growth forest and sell the timber, my GDP goes up because I generated economic activity.
Precisely. You sold a product, money changed hands, the GDP speedometer ticks upward.
But I don't have a forest anymore.
Right. Your nation is now poorer by one ancient forest. You've depleted a natural asset that provided ecological services, water filtration, and, long-term timber potential.
Traditional GDP doesn't care about the asset side of the balance sheet at all, does it? Only the cash flow.
It really doesn't. And this is why the report heavily emphasizes a different metric called adjusted net savings, or ANS.
Adjusted net savings. Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that because I think it's a concept that completely reframes how we should look at national wealth.
Adjusted net savings attempts to fix the GDP blind spot by acting as a true national balance sheet.
So how is it calculated?
It starts with the gross national savings of a country. Then it adds investments in human capital like education spending.
Because educating a child is building an asset for the future.
Exactly. But then, crucially, it subtracts the depletion of natural resources. It subtracts the depreciation of physical capital. And it subtracts the damages caused by pollution.
Wow. So it is essentially charging the economy for the wear and tear it inflicts on the country itself.
Yes. And when you apply this metric to Kosovo, a massive twist emerges in the narrative.
Let me guess. It doesn't look as good as the GDP arrow.
Yes. Not at all. Despite the GDP doubling, Kosovo's adjusted net savings remains highly volatile and often deeply compromised.
How bad is it?
Well, the report reveals that in some recent years, when you calculate the environmental wear and tear, specifically the economic damages from carbon dioxide emissions and particulate matter pollution, that environmental damage alone eats up over 4% of the entire gross national income.
4%? That is a fascinating way to quantify pollution. Over 4% of the national wealth just vanishing into thin air, literally.
It's a huge drag on the economy.
And I want to make sure we understand how that wealth vanishes. It's not just an abstract spreadsheet adjustment, right?
No, not at all.
When we talk about the economic damage of particulate matter, we are talking about tangible financial losses for real people.
We are talking about highly tangible, cascading economic losses. When particulate matter in the air increases, asthma rates in children skyrocket.
Which means more hospital admissions.
Exactly. That requires the government to spend more on healthcare infrastructure. It means parents have to miss work to care for their sick children, which lowers labor productivity.
Oh, I see.
It means adults develop chronic respiratory illnesses, forcing them into early retirement, which shrinks the tax base.
So the 4% G&I loss is the aggregation of all those lost labor hours, hospital bills, and shortened working lifespans.
Yes. The wealth generated by environmental degradation feels like free money in the short term, but the bill always comes due.
What's fascinating here is how this sets up the core tension of the deep dive. Is this sustainable prosperity, or is it simply short-term borrowing against their own future capital and environmental health?
That is the million-dollar question. It makes you look at that $10.4 billion GDP completely differently, doesn't it?
It really does. It's not just about how much money is in the cash register at the end of the day. It's about whether the store is slowly burning down while you're counting the cash.
And that leads to the next logical step in our analysis. If the wealth isn't coming from ultra-efficient, highly sustainable domestic production,
Where is all this purchasing power actually originating? How is the cash getting into the register in the first place?
Right. Which brings us to how the people of Kosovo are spending their money and the structural anomaly of their consumption.
Yeah, I was looking at the section on the macroeconomic structure, and the data reveals that Kosovo is an intensely, almost uniquely consumption-driven economy.
Very much so. The metric here is final consumption expenditure as a percentage of GDP.
Okay, so in a balanced, highly developed economy, you generally want to see a healthy mix, right?
Yeah, exactly. You want domestic consumption? Yes. But you also want robust government investment, strong business investment and capital and research, and ideally, strong net exports.
But in Kosovo, final consumption expenditure, particularly driven by household spending, hovers around an astounding 100% of their GDP.
It's staggering.
Okay, let's stop right there and look at the math. The report notes that this final consumption expenditure actually peaked at 105% of GDP in 2022.
Household spending alone reached $7 billion in 2022.
Wait, how could a country spend 105% of its GDP? I remember looking at my own budget in college. If my income was $1,000 a month and I was spending $1,500 a month,
You were consuming 150% of your GDP.
right, and the only way I could do that was by racking up debt or having my parents sending money. How does an entire sovereign nation spend more than what it produces?
Your college budget analogy is actually the perfect macroeconomic parallel here.
Really?
Yeah, if a country is consuming significantly more than it produces, it is physically impossible to balance the ledger internally.
Because the domestic industrial base simply isn't generating enough goods to meet the household demand.
Exactly, nor is it generating the wages to fund that demand. So the country has to import goods to satisfy the consumption.
And the trade deficit numbers here are monumental. I mean, they're huge.
They are.
In 2023, Kosovo imported $6.36 billion worth of goods, but they only exported $1.03 billion worth of goods.
They're importing more than 6 times the value of the goods they are exporting.
The overall trade deficit for goods and services hit a negative $2.96 billion in 2022.
Let's explore the mechanics of a trade deficit that massive. Normally, if a country runs a massive trade deficit, the global currency markets punish them.
Right, because if you are constantly selling your local currency to buy dollars or euros so you can import foreign goods, the value of your local currency plummets.
Which makes imports more expensive, which eventually forces the country to consume less and balance its trade.
And this is a big but, Kosovo unilaterally adopted the euro as its currency, right, even though they aren't formally in the Eurozone.
Exactly, they use the euro. This provides incredible price stability and makes importing very easy, but it completely removes their ability to devalue a local currency to boost exports.
Wow. So you have a country using a strong currency, spending over 100% of its GDP, and running a multi-billion-dollar trade deficit.
By all traditional economic models, the internal currency reserves should dry up within months.
The economy should stall, and a massive austerity crisis should hit. But it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Because they have their equivalent of the parents sending money to the college student. The impossible math is solved by remittances.
The diaspora. The visual in the report for this is brilliant in its simplicity.
Oh, the envelope.
Yeah, a single envelope with cash inside, connecting the globe to Kosovo.
That envelope is the absolute pillar of their macroeconomic stability.
And the numbers are wild. Personal transfers from the diaspora skyrocketed from $440 million in the year 2000 to an astounding $1.46 billion in 2023.
$1.46 billion, just individuals living in Germany, Switzerland, the United States, wiring money back to their families in Pristina and other towns.
That is roughly 14% of their entire GDP just arriving in the mail.
It is the bloodline. Remittances are the primary mechanism balancing the international payments and fueling that massive domestic household consumption engine. Without that $1.46 billion flowing in from abroad, the ability of Kosovans to buy those $6.36 billion in imported goods evaporates overnight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this creates a massive vulnerability. The economy isn't producing goods to trade, it's exporting its people, who then send cash back to buy imported goods.
Let's really think about what this looks like on the ground. Imagine you are a local entrepreneur in a mid-sized town in Kosovo. You have some capital and you want to start a business.
Okay.
In a normal economy, you might look at local resources and decide to build a small manufacturing plant to produce, I don't know, furniture or textiles.
Right, something productive.
But in an economy flooded with remittance euros, the incentives are completely warped. Why take the massive risk of building a factory, navigating local regulations, and training a workforce to make a product that might not compete globally.
When instead, the rational, low-risk choice is to open a cafe, a retail store, or an import business.
Exactly. You just set up a mechanism to capture all those remittance euros flowing in, and you use them to sell imported German cars or Italian clothes.
You are describing a phenomenon very closely related to what economists call Dutch disease.
Dutch disease. I've heard that term. Originally, that referred to a country discovering a massive natural resource like oil or natural gas, right?
Yes, the sudden influx of foreign money from the oil drives up the local standard of living and makes importing goods very cheap. But it completely hollows out the domestic manufacturing sector because it can't compete with the easy money.
So it's essentially a form of Dutch disease, but instead of discovering oil beneath the ground, Kosovo discovered a highly lucrative diaspora spread across Europe.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Human capital has become their primary export commodity.
On a macroeconomic level, the economy is structurally designed to export its own people, young, able-bodied workers who leave the country to find higher wages.
And those people then send cash back, which is then used to buy imported goods. It's a closed economic loop that completely bypasses the need for domestic industrial development.
But that raises a massive existential question. If the economy functions by exporting people and importing their money, who is actually left inside the country?
Right.
We've talked about the money flowing in, but we need to look at the human capital actually living and working in Kosovo right now.
Demographics are often referred to as destiny in economics. And Kosovo's demographic profile is currently undergoing a severe and highly problematic shift.
Tell me about it.
Historically, developing nations rely on a phenomenon called a demographic dividend.
I've had that term applied to China in the 1990s and India today. It's when you have a massive boom in the young, working-age population relative to the number of dependent children and elderly people, right?
Yes. If you have the jobs available, this massive young workforce can hypercharge your economic growth.
Because it provides cheap labor, drives innovation, and generates massive tax revenues before those workers age and require pensions and health care.
But the data indicates that Kosovo's demographic dividend is fading out before they really even got the chance to fully leverage it.
The population is actually shrinking. The report says they've seen a negative growth rate of negative 5.39% recently, which is staggering for a developing nation.
And that is largely driven by the emigration we just talked about. The young people are leaving to become the diaspora.
And as the youth leave, the population left behind ages rapidly. The report notes that the elderly dependency ratio, which is the ratio of older dependents to the working age population, has essentially doubled.
It jumped from 7.5% in 2010 to 14.5% in 2023.
Over 65s now make up more than 10% of the entire population.
So you have a shrinking workforce that has to support a growing elderly population. That immediately puts pressure on public finances.
But we also have to look at the quality of the workforce that remains.
We measure that using the Human Capital Index, or HCI.
The report states Kosovo's HCI is currently sitting at 0.567. For an audience that might not track World Bank metrics daily, how is HCI calculated and what does a 0.567 actually mean in practical terms?
The Human Capital Index measures the amount of human capital a child born today can expect to attain by age 18, given the risks of poor health and poor education in their specific country.
Okay.
A score of 1.0 means the child will reach their absolute maximum potential, full health, and complete high-quality education.
So a score of 0.567 means?
It means a child born in Kosovo today will only be about 56.7% as productive when they enter the workforce as they could be under optimal conditions. By the way, the score for women is slightly lower at 0.54, while men are at 0.551.
That is an immense loss of potential. You are essentially losing over 40% of your future economic productivity to systemic inefficiencies.
And the report notes that while secondary education completion rates are actually going up among the over 25 population, there is a severe mismatch between what the schools are teaching and what the labor market actually needs.
The education mismatch is a classic transitional economy problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. Universities might be producing thousands of graduates with degrees in public administration or theoretical economics, but the market desperately needs mechanical engineers, software developers, and skilled tradespeople.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The most alarming demographic data in the report isn't just about age or education, it's about who is actually participating in the economy.
This is a major issue.
When you look at the labor market participation rates, you see a completely fractured society. The male labor force participation rate is around 50%,
That's already quite low compared to global averages in the developed world, which usually hover around 70% or more.
but the female labor force participation rate, it is 24.1%.
Only 24.1% of working-age women in Kosovo are formally participating in the labor market. That is one of the lowest rates in all of Europe.
I am looking at this purely from a resource management perspective. You have a country that is running a massive trade deficit. It desperately needs domestic production to balance its books. Yet, essentially, one entire half of the population is sidelined from the formal workforce. How do you grow an economy with one hand tied behind your back?
You really can.
How does a number get that low? Is it purely cultural?
Culture and traditional gender roles certainly play a significant part, but as economists, we look at structural barriers.
Like what?
In a rapidly transitioning economy, if the state does not provide adequate, affordable childcare infrastructure, women are structurally forced to stay home. Childcare costs act as a massive hidden tax on women entering the workforce.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, if the available jobs are predominantly in heavy agriculture or construction sectors traditionally dominated by men, and the service sector isn't growing fast enough, the opportunities simply aren't there.
And it's not just women who are missing from the workforce. The report highlights a massive crisis in youth unemployment.
Yes, specifically a very high rate of what economists call NEETs youth who are not in education, employment, or training.
We are talking about 15 to 24-year-olds who are essentially economically ghosted.
And this is where we can tie the different threads of this report together. When you combine the massive influx of remittances with the low female participation and the high youth NEET rate, a fascinating and deeply troubling economic mechanism reveals itself.
What's that?
High remittances actually create a disincentive for local labor by artificially raising what economists call the reservation wage.
The reservation wage. I want to make sure we define that clearly because it feels like the key to understanding the entire labor paradox here.
But the reservation wage is the absolute lowest wage in which a worker would be willing to accept a particular type of job.
Okay, let's walk through a hypothetical scenario.
Let's do it. Imagine you are a 20-year-old living in Pristina. You aren't in university. You are looking for work.
Right.
The local labor market is tough, and the jobs that do exist, maybe working in local agriculture or basic retail or low-end manufacturing, involve grueling hours for very low pay, perhaps 300 or 400 euros a month.
If that is your only option for survival, you take the job. That is how early industrialization usually works.
Right. But now, introduce the diaspora. What if you have an uncle working in construction in Munich and a sister working in hospitality in Zurich?
Okay.
Between them, they wire your family 500 euros a month. That fundamentally alters your economic calculus.
Oh. The local wage can't compete with the foreign cash injection. The remittance provides a baseline safety net.
Exactly. It allows that 20-year-old to hold out for a better, more prestigious job that might not actually exist yet.
Or it simply allows them to reject the grueling, low-paying local job because their basic physiological needs are already being met by the external cash flow.
Why sweat in a local field or a hot factory for a pittance when the family income from abroad is significantly higher than what you could earn locally?
It's a completely rational choice for the individual. I mean, I can't blame anyone for making that choice.
No, of course not.
But on a macroeconomic scale, it acts as a poison pill. It hollows out the domestic labor force, makes local manufacturing uncompetitive because they can't find cheap labor, and ensures the country remains entirely dependent on imports.
You've perfectly articulated the remittance trap. The very lifeline that keeps the country afloat is the anchor weighing down its structural evolution.
So let's recap where we are. We have a shrinking, aging population. We have an immense gender gap in labor. We have youth sitting on the sidelines because of distorted reservation wages. And we have an economy running on imported cash.
It's a lot of headwinds.
With all these incredibly complex headwinds, how is the government managing the ship? Who is at the wheel?
That brings us to Section 4, the institutional bedrock.
Because if the youth are leaving and wages are distorted, the only way to fix that is by creating high-quality local jobs. But who is going to build factories or tech hubs there if the government isn't stable?
To fix these structural economic issues, you need highly effective, transparent institutions. You need a state that functions smoothly.
And what does the data say about Kosovo's government?
Well, the data from the World Bank's Worldwide Governance Indicators shows a very mixed bag for Kosovo. It is a story of painful transitions, but also some genuine, hard-won breakthroughs.
Let's start with the breakthroughs, because credit where credit is due, building state institutions from scratch following the conflace of the late 1990s is an incredibly difficult endeavor.
It is a generational challenge, and Kosovo has made measurable strides. If we look at the indicator for control of corruption, Kosovo has improved significantly.
How much improvement are we talking about?
In 2010, they were sitting in the 27.6th percentile globally. By 2022, they had climbed to the 44.5th percentile.
That is a very noticeable improvement in reducing the perception and hopefully the reality of public power being exercised for private gain.
And the report also notes that overall government effectiveness, which measures the quality of public services, the performance of the civil service, and the quality of policy formulation, hit a historic high percentile of 47.6 recently.
So the bureaucratic machinery is undeniably getting better at its job.
It is. And you can see the results of that improved bureaucracy in their social outcomes.
The public health data in the report is actually really encouraging. Life expectancy at birth has steadily risen to 70 years. And here is a massive win for their healthcare infrastructure. 99% of all births are now attended by skilled health professionals.
That is a crucial foundational indicator of a functioning public health system. Infant mortality goes down, maternal survival goes up.
Building an economy is like building a house. They are putting on a great new roof with public health and life expectancy and sweeping the floors by controlling corruption. But the foundation, the rule of law and regulatory stability is still cracked.
Yes. We also see an interesting anomaly in the income inequality data before we get to the rule of law.
Oh, right, the Gini coefficient.
The Gini coefficient, which measures wealth distribution across a population where 0 is perfect equality and 100 is maximum inequality, was sitting at 26.7 in 2019.
A Gini of 26.7 is remarkably egalitarian, especially for a transitional economy where you usually see massive wealth hoarding by a small elite.
It is low. However, we have to interpret that carefully. A low Gini coefficient doesn't necessarily mean everyone is wealthy. It can also mean that wealth is compressed.
Yeah. The report notes that poverty remains a major policy focus, especially for those living under the upper middle income poverty line of $5.30 a day.
So the pie might be distributed relatively evenly, but the pie itself is still quite small. Still, the progress on health, anti-corruption, and basic government effectiveness is real.
But let's talk about that foundation, the rule of law.
The bedrock of any modern market economy is the rule of law. And this is where Kosovo struggles immensely.
Where do they rank?
Their rule of law indicator has been hovering around the 32nd percentile globally, with a negative absolute score of negative 0.31 in 2022.
Ouch.
Similarly, their regulatory quality, which evaluates the ability of the government to formulate and implement sound policies that permit and promote private sector development, is challenged, sitting at a percentile of 41.
You know, I think a better analogy here is an operating system on a computer.
How so?
You can have great hardware, like a young population with potential. You can have great apps like the remittance money flowing in. But the rule of law is the operating system. If the OS is riddled with bugs, if it's unstable and unpredictable, the system crashes the moment you try to run complex programs. And in an economy, the most complex program is foreign direct investment.
That is a highly illuminating analogy, because while public health and anti-corruption are vital, they don't directly solve the trade deficit. They don't magically create jobs for the needs.
The only way to break the remittance trap is through foreign direct investment, or FDI.
Exactly. You need international capital to flow in, build manufacturing plants, set up regional tech hubs, and integrate the local workforce into the global supply chain.
But rule of law is the ultimate bottleneck for FDI.
It really is. This raises an important question. How can Kosovo transition to a manufacturing export-led economy if foreign companies don't feel legally secure investing their capital there?
Let's walk through the mechanics of that bottleneck. Imagine you are a German auto parts manufacturer looking to build a new plant to supply assembly lines in Central Europe. You have 50 million euros to invest. You are looking at Kosovo because the labor is theoretically cheaper than in Germany. What stops you?
What stops you is risk. To build that factory, you need to buy land. You need to sign long-term contracts with local suppliers for raw materials and logistics. You need to navigate environmental and zoning regulations.
Right.
If the rule of law is weak, your €50 million investment is incredibly vulnerable. What if the property deeds are tied up in backlogged, unpredictable local courts?
What if a local supplier breaches their contract and you can't rely on an impartial judiciary to enforce the penalty?
Exactly. Your investment could be frozen for a decade in litigation, or you could simply lose the capital entirely.
Global capital is inherently cowardly. It seeks the path of least resistance and highest legal predictability.
If property rights aren't strictly enforced, the risk premium of doing business in Kosovo becomes too high. The German manufacturer will simply look at the map and decide to build their factory in a neighboring country with a stronger legal foundation, even if the labor costs slightly more.
This is how a weak rule of law physically repels money. And the data reflects that. The report states that FDI in Kosovo is currently only sitting at about 7.6% of their GDP. It needs to be significantly higher to drive the industrial upgrading they require.
Which brings us to a massive existential hurdle. Let's engage in a hypothetical scenario.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let's say Kosovo achieves an institutional miracle, they pass sweeping judicial reforms, the rule of law becomes ironclad, regulatory quality skyrockets to Western European standards, and suddenly, foreign companies are lining up at the border.
Okay, the FDI floodgates are open. Multinational corporations want to build factories, massive data centers, industrial parks.
What is going to power all of those new facilities?
And this circles us all the way back to the very first thing we talked about on page 1, the environmental cost, the adjusted net savings, and the red-circled shadow.
If you want to industrialize, if you want to run data centers, you need immense, reliable, baseline amounts of energy. And Kosovo's energy sector has what the report describes as a black background.
An absolute reliance on coal.
Yes. Between 90 and 93% of all electricity generation in Kosovo comes from coal.
The numbers in the report regarding their energy mix are just grim from an environmental standpoint. And it's not just any coal. They're sitting on massive reserves of lignite.
For those who aren't familiar with energy commodities, lignite is often called brown coal.
It has a very high moisture content and a low energy density compared to hard black coal. This means you have to burn significantly more of it to get the same amount of electricity.
Which results in astronomically high, localized emissions of carbon dioxide and particulate matter.
It provides them with energy security because it's a domestic resource. They don't have to import their power.
But the localized and global cost is devastating. This ties directly back to the 4% GNI loss we discussed. The CO2 damage alone was estimated at $260 million in the year 2020.
Wow.
And beyond the abstract dollar figure, the environmental damage, their lignite reliance represents a massive, perhaps insurmountable barrier to modern economic development.
It's a complete paradox. How can a country leapfrog into the digital economy when it's literally burning rocks to keep the servers running?
They really can't.
We live in an era where global companies have incredibly strict ESG mandates, environmental, social, and governance goals. Apple, Google, or even large European manufacturers are not going to put a major energy-intensive facility in a country where the power grid is 93% powered by lignite coal.
The carbon footprint of those operations would be totally unacceptable to their shareholders and their own internal climate pledges.
You've hit on the exact crux of their structural bind. It is a dual trap. On one side, they lack the institutional rule of law framework to attract the investment.
But on the other side, even if they fix the institutions and get the investment, their energy infrastructure is entirely antithetical to 21st century sustainable corporate goals.
The growth we've seen in their GDP numbers, that doubling from 5 billion to 10 billion, is real money. People are buying cars and building houses.
But that macroeconomy is built on a highly fragile, carbon-heavy, import-dependent architecture that is inherently self-limiting.
So if you were the architect tasked with fixing this, if you had to present the master plan to the government based on the synthesis of these 1,000 indicators, what is the roadmap? How does a country actually navigate out of this labyrinth?
The report does lay out a synthesized conclusion on the final page, presenting a very clear 3-step ladder to climb out of this trap.
Step 1.
Step 1 is governance reform. There is no escaping this. They absolutely must solidify the rule of law and regulatory quality.
Right, fix the operating system.
Exactly. They need to build a predictable, impartial judicial system that makes the country legally safe and attractive for foreign direct investment. Without this foundation, the rest of the plan is purely theoretical.
Assuming they build the OS, what is step 2?
Step 2 is industrial upgrading. They have to shift the economic engine from an external one to an internal one. They must intentionally reduce their reliance on the diaspora mailing cash and use the incoming FDI to build an export-oriented manufacturing and service sector.
They need to leverage that young population, perhaps pivoting aggressively toward the digital economy and IT services, which require less heavy physical infrastructure.
Rather than letting those youth remain NEETs or emigrate, yes.
And step 3 is addressing the Black background.
Step 3 is the green transition. They must systematically swap out their reliance on lignite coal for sustainable renewable energy sources, solar, wind, and perhaps deep regional grid integration with their neighbors.
Because without step 3, even if they achieve steps 1 and 2, the environmental damages will continue to eat their adjusted net savings alive.
The particulate matter will continue to degrade their human capital's health, and international green capital will continue to shun them.
So what does this all mean? I think the core takeaway here is that true national development is so much more complicated than just bouncing numbers on a spreadsheet.
It really is.
A rising GDP is great for headlines. But if that GDP is fueled by remittances, completely reliant on imports, leaving women and youth locked out of the workforce and burning dirty coal to power the illusion, that's not an economic miracle, that's a mirage.
True. Resilient growth is the harmonious coexistence of the environment, society, and sustainable capital generation.
It is the stark difference between simply spending money today and actually building wealth for tomorrow.
Kosovo has immense potential. The resilience they've shown post-conflict, the undeniable improvements in public health and basic anti-corruption governance are highly commendable.
But the structural pivot they face right now, moving from a remittance and coal economy to an FDI and green economy, will determine the trajectory of their next 50 years.
It is a phenomenal case study in the immense complexities of modern macroeconomic transitions.
I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the numbers, the demographics, and the hidden costs of Kosovo's development. We promise to look beyond the shiny headline numbers, and I think uncovering the mechanisms behind the trade deficits and the reservation wages does exactly that.
I agree. It really puts things into perspective.
While that upward GDP arrow looks fantastic on a whiteboard, that red circle of environmental and demographic debt tells the much deeper, truer story of the challenges ahead.
It's been great breaking this down with you.
I want to leave you with a final concept to mull over as you go about your day. We usually define a country's economy by what happens inside its physical borders. We measure the factories on its soil, the crops grown in its fields, the transactions in its local shops.
Right.
But when we look at a place like Kosovo, where a nation's greatest export is its own human capital, and its most vital economic lifeline is the money those people wire back home from across the continent, it makes you wonder.
It really does.
In the 21st century, in an era of digital transfers and mass migration, does an economy even have borders anymore? Or does a nation's true economy exist wherever its people happen to be? Think about that.
Yeah.
And maybe take a closer look at the mechanisms driving the mirage of numbers in your own local autonomy. Until next time.